We meet young Timmy again at 6:45 p.m. with a satisfied gaze and a belly full of pasta. Dinner was over, and Tommy was helping their mom clean the table.
What are you boys up to tonight? Are you going to be playing more games together? No, we finished that game last night. It's a shame. We're having a lot of fun playing it together. Yeah, we should look for another game to tag team like that. It was a lot of fun. Well, if you find one, you let me know. Dad and I might be willing to sponsor a game that gets you to play nice with each other.
Timmy and Tommy exchanged a sibling glance. This was a golden goose they just had to take advantage of. They telepathically agreed to talk about it later.
So the question stands, what are you up to? I was going to be reading more of my programming book. I barely scratched the surface and there's so much to learn before I can apply it. I'm so happy to see you being so passionate about learning. Something might come of it one day. What about you, Tommy?
Timmy was surprised because his mom had left a suspension of sorts in her tone, as if she was examining the truthfulness of Tommy's answer.
I'll just read in my room, I guess. Maybe chat with Frank later.
Tommy replied in a very matter-of-fact tone.
Did James appreciate your help the other day? What? Oh yeah, he was really thankful for my help on Moby Dick. Moby Dick, yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. I had no idea you were an expert on Hawthorne. Yep, that's me. That's good old Tommy, always ready to help his friend. Indeed, such a selfless person. I am so proud of you, Tommy, for all the sacrifices you're making.
She looked pleased with the answer, though Timmy couldn't tell whether it was because Tommy's answer satisfied her or confirmed her suspicions.
You boys consider yourself excused while I get dinner for Dad ready. Thanks, Mom,
replied the boys in unison. As they ran upstairs, Tommy grabbed a magazine from the bookshelf and went into the bedroom, while Timmy grabbed his copy of Flights of Fantasy, sat his ass in a comfy chair, and started reading.
Alright, where did I leave it off last time? Ah, yes, the coordinates. From coordinates to pixel offsets. We don't have such a command available for the programs that we will develop in this book. Although a copy of the BGI comes with the Borland C++ compiler, we will not be using the BGI's functions in this book. Nonetheless, we will occasionally need to look at the position of a pixel on the display using Cartesian coordinates. Thus, we need a way to translate a coordinate pair into a specific video RAM address, so that we can change the value stored at that address to a value representing the desired color of the pixel. Fortunately, there's a simple formula for doing this. In fact, there are many simple formulas depending on video mode. In mode 13H, the formula is particularly simple. It is pixel address is the y coordinate times 320 plus the x coordinate. Let's translate that into C++ code. If the integer variable x contains the x coordinate of the pixel whose color we wish to change, and the integer variable y contains the y coordinate, we can get the offset of the pixel within video RAM into the integer variable offset by writing offset equals y times 320 plus x. Easy, right? We'll make use of this simple formula many times in chapters to come. Moving the origin. Although it is customary to put the origin, the 00 point of the screen's coordinate system in the upper left corner of the display, it is not always desirable to do so. In fact, later we will move the origin to several different positions on the display, including the center. Nonetheless, it is simpler to calculate screen positions based on the origin in the customary corner, so we'll need to translate back and forth between the two systems. We'll perform the calculations concerning the positions of objects on the screen with the origin located at coordinates x origin, y origin, relative to the upper left corner of the display, where x origin and y origin are predefined constant. In effect, we are creating a virtual coordinate system separate from the system normally used to specify coordinates on the display. Figure 2.9 shows the difference between this virtual system and the usual system. To translate these virtual coordinates back into screen coordinates, i.e. coordinates with the origin in the upper left corner of the display, we'll use the following formula. screen x equals virtual x plus x origin, screen y equals virtual y plus y origin. You'll see this formula pop up several times in the chapters to come. Yeah, okay, makes sense, right? If x origin, y origin is your 0, 0, then you just add x origin to your virtual x, and that's the total x from the top left of the screen, and so on. Okay. Addressing multiple pixels. It's often necessary to find the address of an entire block of pixels. For instance, you may want to change the color of all the pixels in a single horizontal line. One way to do this is to calculate the address of the pixel at the left end of the line, change the color of the pixel at that location, then add 1 to the x-coordinate, calculate the address of the pixel at that location, and so on until you've changed the color of all the pixels in the line. This involves a lot of extra work, however. Once the address of the pixel at the beginning of the line is calculated, you can find the address of the pixel to the right of it simply by adding 1 to the address rather than adding 1 to the x-coordinate and then recalculating the address. If the variable offset is set equal to the address of the pixel at coordinates x, y, it can be advanced to the address of the pixel at coordinates x plus 1, y with the instruction offset plus plus. Similarly, it can be moved leftward to the address of the pixel at coordinates x minus 1, y with the instruction offset minus minus. Moving the pixel location by 1 y coordinate in either direction is equally easy. In mode 13H, the screen is 320 pixels wide, so moving down one line, that is 1 y coordinate, is a matter of adding 320 to the value of the offset. If the variable offset is equal to the address of the pixel at coordinates x, y, then it can be advanced to the address of the pixel at coordinates x, y plus 1 with the instruction offset plus equals 320. You can probably guess that we can move up 1 y coordinate from xy to xy minus 1 by subtracting 320 from the offset. Offset minus equals 320. To move diagonally, that is, change both coordinates, combine the two actions. To move offset from xy to x plus 1, y plus 1, just add 3, 2, 1. Offset plus equals 3, 2, 1. Into the third dimension. So far, we've spoken only on two-dimensional coordinate systems. But this book is about three-dimensional computer graphics, so it's about time to add a dimension and take a look at three-dimensional coordinate systems. First, however, let's ask a fundamental question. What do we mean when we refer to a dimension? In comic books and pulp science fiction, the term is sometimes used to refer to alternate worlds, parallel universes. When we go from the second dimension to the third, are we jumping from one world to another? Not exactly. Without getting technical, a dimension can be defined as a way in which a line can be perpendicular, that is, at right angles, to other lines. On the surface of a sheet of paper, we can draw two lines that are perpendicular to one another, as in figure 210. Thus, the surface of the paper is two-dimensional. In geometric parlance, it's a plane. If we could draw lines in space, we could draw three lines that are perpendicular to one another. Thus, space is three-dimensional. Although we can't draw in space, you can demonstrate this to yourself by holding three pencils in your hand and arranging them so that each is perpendicular to the other two. If you're indexterous enough to do so without dropping the pencils, try to imagine how you would do so, or you could just look at the illustration in figure 211. Yeah, well good, yeah, that makes sense. In a Cartesian coordinate system, the axes represent the dimensions, that is, the ways in which lines can be perpendicular to one another. After all, each coordinate axis is always perpendicular to all other coordinate axes. In a two-dimensional coordinate system, there are two axes, one for each dimension. In a three-dimensional coordinate system, there should be three axes, a fact that René Descartes well understood. If the story about Descartes and the fly is true, then the philosopher-mathematician must have invented three-dimensional coordinate systems before he invented the two-dimensional kind. Descartes realized that the position of the fly at any instant could be measured, in theory at last, relative to an origin somewhere in space. But it would be necessary to use three numbers to measure the position of the fly, not two as with the position of a point on a plane, because there are three directions in which the fly can move relative to the origin. These directions are sometimes called length, width, and depth, though the terms are arbitrary. We can just refer them as the three dimensions of space. To plot the position of the fly, then, a coordinate triple is required. When the fly is at the origin, it is at coordinates 0, 0, 0. If it then buzzes 5 units in the x direction, it moves to coordinates 5, 0, 0. A motion of 7 units in the y direction takes the fly to coordinates 5, 7, 0. After a move of 2 units in the third direction, which for obvious reasons we'll call the z direction, the fly will wind up at coordinates 5, 7, 2. Of course, most flies don't zip around with such neat regard for coordinate axes. More likely, the fly went straight from coordinates 0, 0, 0 to coordinates 5, 7, 2 in a single spurt of flight, then meandered off in a different direction altogether, possibly plunging suicidally into Descartes' cup of steaming tea. We can draw a three-dimensional coordinate system on a sheet of paper, but we can devise such systems in our minds. And as we shall see in Chapter 8, we can create them on the computer. In a three-dimensional coordinate system, we call the three axes x, y, and z. Typically, the x and y axes correspond to the x and y axes of two-dimensional graph, while the z-axis becomes the depth axis, running into and out of the traditional two-dimensional graph, as shown in Figure 212. In Chapter 8, we'll look at ways to make the axes of the three-dimensional graph correspond to directions in our real three-dimensional world. Picture is not very helpful here, but I guess we can sort of see this is vertical wall, horizontal floor, depth going down. Shapes, solids, and coordinates. We saw earlier that we could use two-dimensional coordinates to describe geometric concepts such as points and lines. We can also use two-dimensional coordinates to describe shapes such as triangles, squares, circles, and even arbitrary polygons, that is, many-sided shapes. And we can use three-dimensional coordinates to describe three-dimensional solids, such as cubes, pyramids, and spheres. In fact, we needn't stop with simple shapes. We can use coordinate systems to describe just about any shape or solid that can occur in the real world, including rocks, trees, mountains, and even human beings, though some of these shapes are easier to describe than others. Since this is going to be an important topic throughout the rest of the book, let's see just how we'd go about creating this kind of coordinate representation. From describing a line with two coordinate pairs representing the line's endpoints, it takes only a little leap of imagination to extend this concept to describe any shape that can be constructed out of line segments. Triangles, squares, and even polygons of arbitrary complexity. Figures 213, 14, and 15. 213, 214, 215. Okay, yeah, you just get the line pieces, track them, top and bottom kind of thing. Makes sense. Any shape made out of an unbroken series of line segments can be represented as a series of vertices. In geometry, a vertex is a point with which two lines intersect, though we'll use the term more loosely here to include endpoints of lines as well. Since vertices are points in space, they can be described by their coordinates. Thus, the square in Figure 214 could be described by the coordinates of its vertices, 4, 9, 4, 3, 10, 3, 10, 9. We'll use this scheme to describe two-dimensional shapes in Chapter 6. Not all shapes are made out of a continuous unbroken series of line segments. Consider the square with an x inside, as shown in Figure 216, for instance. Although all the lines in the shape touch one another, they cannot be drawn with a single continuous line. If you doubt this, try drawing the shape without lifting your pencil from the paper or retracing a previously drawn line. Well, if I start in the center, oh yeah, and we're missing the two lines, top and bottom. Start in the corner, and then we're stuck down here. Oh, we're missing the stop one. A more versatile system for storing shapes that would take such awkward, but quite common cases into account would consist of two lists. A list of the coordinates of the vertices and a list of the lines that connect them. The list of vertex coordinates for a square with an x inside will look exactly like that for the square of the last paragraph. The list of lines consists simply of pointers to the entries in the vertex descriptor list, indicating which vertices in the list represent the endpoints of a given line. 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 0, 0, 2, and 1, 3. This tells us that the first line of the shape connects vertex 0, the first vertex in the list of the last paragraph, with vertex 1. The second line of the shape connects vertex 1 to vertex 2, and so forth. We use this scheme for describing shapes in chapter 8. So 0, 1, 2, 3. No, let's do 0, 1, 2, 3. So that 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 3, 0. And then 0, 2, and 1, 3. Okay. Three-dimensional vertices. Describing a three-dimensional shape made up of line segments is done in exactly the same manner as describing two-dimensional shapes, except that a third coordinate must be included when describing each vertex, so that the vertex location in the z-dimension can be pinpointed. Although it's difficult to do this on a sheet of paper, it's easy to imagine it. In figure 217, I have imagined a cube made up of line segments within a three-dimensional coordinate system. Right? Shapes made out of line segments aren't especially realistic, but all of these concepts can be extended to drawing more complex shapes. You might wonder, though, how something like a circle or a sphere can be described as a series of vertices connected by line segments. Would the number of vertices required to describe such a shape be prohibitively large, perhaps even infinite? Well, yes, but there are two approaches that we can use to describe such shapes within a coordinate system. One is to approximate the shape through relatively small line segments. How small should the line segments be? That depends on how realistic the drawing is intended to be and how much time you can spend on mathematical calculations relating to those vertices. For instance, a square can be thought of as a very rough approximation of a circle using 4 line segments. An octagon, which uses 8 line segments, is a better approximation of a circle, see figure 218. But a hexadecagon with 16 line segments is even better. Yeah, alright, I see what they mean here. As far as realism is concerned, the more line segments, the merrier, but there are other considerations, especially when we are storing and processing the vertex and line segment information in a computer. Graphing equations. Descartes came up with an alternative method of describing shapes such as circles and spheres, one that is nicely suited to a microcomputer graphics, even though Descartes developed it 3.5 centuries before the advent of the Apple II. Descartes realized that a coordinate system, such as the one that now bears his name, could be used to graph the results of algebraic equations, and the resulting graphs often took on familiar and not so familiar geometric shapes. Which means that we can also describe shapes, in theory any shape at all, as algebraic equations. If you ever took an algebra course, you probably remember, perhaps with a shudder, a thing or two about graphing equations. Even if you didn't, the following paragraph should bring you painlessly up to speed. Algebra deals with equations, symbolic statements about a relationship between different values, in which certain values are unknown or variable. These equations resemble the assignment statements found in all computer programming languages, but instead of assigning a value to a variable, they assert that the value of one variable bears a certain relationship to the value of one or more other variables. The resemblance between algebraic equations and assignment statements can be confusing, both to students of algebra and students of programming, so we'll dwell for a moment on the difference. Here's a familiar algebraic equation, x equals y. The letters x and y represent numeric quantities of unknown value, and yet, though we do not know the values of these numeric quantities, we do know something important about the relationship between these two values. We know that they are the same. Whatever the value of y is, x has the same value and vice versa. Thus, if y is equal to 2, then x is also equal to 2. If y is equal to 324 and 218. If y is equal to 324.218, then x is equal to 324.218. In C++, on the other hand, the statement x equals y would be an assignment statement, It would assign the value of the variable y to the variable x. After this assignment, the algebraic equation x equals y would be true, but it wouldn't necessarily be true before this assignment statement. The difference between an algebraic equation and an assignment statement, then, is that the algebraic equation asserts that the relationship is true, while the assignment statement makes it true. Here's another familiar algebraic equation, x equals 2y. It tells us that the value of x is 2 times the value of y. If y is equal to 2, then x is equal to 4. If y is equal to negative 14, then x is equal to negative 28. Solving the equation. Determining the value of x based on the value of y is called solving the equation. Every time we solve an equation with two variables in it, we produce a pair of numbers, the values of x and the value of y. By treating these pairs of numbers as Cartesian coordinates, we can depict them as points on a two-dimensional Cartesian plane, thus graphing the equation. The graph of the equation x equals y is shown in figure 220. The equation has been solved for 4 values of y, 0, 1, 2, and 3, which produces the coordinate pairs 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, and 3, 3. These coordinates have been graphed and connected by lines. The lines, however, are not an arbitrary part of the graph. They represent additional solutions of the equation for non-integer, i.e. fractional, values of y as well, such as 1.2, 2.7, and 0.18. All solutions of the equation between 0 and 3 fall somewhere on this line. There's no way we could work out all these fractional solutions since there's an infinite number of them, but the graph shows these solutions anyway as points on an infinitely divisible line. Similarly, the equation x equals 2y produces a line when it's graphed, but the line has a different angle or slope from the line produced by the equation x equals y. We'll talk more about the slope of the line in the chapter on the wireframe graphics. For any straight line we can draw on a graph, there is an equation that will produce that line when graphed. That equation is called, logically enough, the equation of the line. Not all equations produce straight lines, however. For our purposes, the more interesting equations are those that produce curves, since curves are so difficult to represent with line segments. It's more efficient for some purposes to represent a curve with an equation, though not for all purposes. Solving an equation for various values can take quite a bit of time, even when performed by computer, so it's often faster to approximate a curve with line segments. Fractals. One type of shape called a fractal is often easier to produce using equations than by storing vertices and line segments, simply because of the difficulty in storing such a shape in the computer's memory. You've probably run across this term before. Fractals have become a buzzword recently in both mathematics and computer programming. A fractal, the term was coined by the mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot, is a shape that possesses the quality of self-similarity. This simply, or not so simply, means that the shape is built up of smaller versions of itself, and these smaller versions of the shape are in turn built up of still smaller versions of the shape. A tree, for instance, is a kind of a fractal shape. A tree is made up of branches, which resemble tiny trees. The branch in turn is made up of twigs, which resemble tiny branches. And the twigs are made up of twiglets, which, well, you get the idea. Because it possesses this self-similarity at several orders of magnification, the tree is said to be fractal. Many other shapes found in nature are essentially fractal. A jagged shoreline, for instance, has pretty much the same quality of jaggedness whether it's viewed from a satellite orbiting 200 miles overhead, from an airplane 20,000 feet above, or by a child sitting on a hilltop overlooking the shore. The human circulatory system consists of a hierarchy of branching arteries and veins that is pretty much identical at several levels of size. A mountain has an irregular, faceted appearance that resembles that of the large and small rocks that make it up, and so forth. If you want to duplicate a three-dimensional nature within the computer, it will be necessary to create fractal shapes. Why? Because fractals give us a maximum amount of realistic detail for a minimum amount of stored data. Instead of storing every vertex and every polygon in a mountain, we can store a fractal equation that will generate an infinite number of mountain-like shapes, and can do so at any level of detail. Similarly, instead of storing every twist and turn of a river or a coastline, we can store a fractal equation that can generate a near infinite number of rivers and coastlines. Alternatively, we can use fractal algorithms to generate in advance shapes that would be difficult to encode by hand, then store the data generated by the algorithm in our program, just as we will store the data for other shapes. We'll talk about this at greater length later. Transformations. In this book, we'll represent two-dimensional and three-dimensional shapes as vertices connected by line segments. Actually, we'll use line segments in the early chapters, then graduate to connecting vertices with colored polygons to create greater realism in later chapters. And we'll develop routines that will draw those shapes at specific coordinate positions on the video display. If we're going to animate these objects, however, it's not enough for us to create and display them. We must also be able to manipulate them, to change their position on the display, even rotate the shapes into brand new positions. In the language of 3D graphics, we're going to transform the images. One of the many advantages of being able to define a shape as a series of numbers, advantages for which all 3D graphics programmers should at least once a day mutter a heartfelt thanks to the ghost of René Descartes, is that we can perform mathematical operations on those numbers to our heart's content. And many generations of mathematicians and computer programmers have worked out the mathematical operations necessary for performing most of the transformations that we will wish to perform on three-dimensional objects. There are quite a few such transformations that we could perform, but we will concentrate on three: scaling, translating, and rotating. Actually, when performed on three-dimensional objects, there are 5 transformations because 3D rotation consists of 3 separate operations, as you'll soon see. Scaling means changing the size of an object. Translating refers to moving an object from one place to another within the coordinate system, and rotating refers, obviously, to rotating an object around a fixed point through a specified axis within the coordinate system. These are operations you will perform in programs developed in later chapters, and the formulas for performing them are widely known. It's a simple matter to include these formulas in a computer program. Making the computer code based on these formulas work quickly and well is another matter, one that we'll talk about at length in later chapters. Note that in all the formulas that follow, it is assumed that objects are represented by a list of coordinate pairs or triplets representing all vertices within the object. Translating and scaling. Translation is the easiest of these transformations and the one that the microcomputer is best equipped to perform without clever optimizations. It involves adding values to the coordinates of the vertices of an object. To move a two-dimensional object from its current coordinate position to another coordinate position, we must perform the following C++ operation on each vertex within the object. New x is equal x plus tx, new y equals y plus ty, where x and y are the current coordinates of the vertex, new x and new y are the translated coordinates, tx is the distance we wish to move the vertex in the x direction, and 2y is the distance we wish to move the vertex in the y dimension. For instance, if we wish to move a vertex by 7 coordinate positions in the x direction and 5 coordinate positions in the y dimension, we would perform these operations. New x equals x plus 7, new y equals y plus 5. By performing these operations on all the vertices of an object, we will have obtained a new set of vertices representing the translated object. We will have moved the object to a new location within the coordinate system. At this point, of course, the object exists only as a set of numbers within the computer's memory, and it is only these numbers that have been moved. We'll deal with the actual details of drawing and animating the object in a later chapter. Translating an object in 3 dimensions works the same way, except that we add a z translation value to the z coordinate in order to move it to the z dimension. New z equals z plus tz. Scaling an object is no more difficult from the programmer's point of view, though it may take the processor of a computer slightly longer to accomplish, since it involves a multiplication operation. Without a math coprocessor, multiplication is somewhat more time-consuming than addition. To scale an object, we simply multiply all the coordinates of all the vertices by a scaling factor. For instance, to double the size of an object, we multiply every coordinate of every vertex by 2. Actually, we're using the term double very loosely here. The operation actually doubles the distance between vertices, which have the effort of quadrupling the area of a 2-dimensional object and increasing the volume of a 3-dimensional object by a factor of 8. To triple the size of the object, we multiply every coordinate by 3. To cut the size of the object in half, we multiply every coordinate by 0.5. Here's the general formula for scaling the xy coordinates of the vertices in a 2-dimensional object. New x equals scaling factor times x, new y equals scaling factor times y. For a 3-dimensional object, the z coordinate of each vertex also must be scaled. New z equals scaling factor times z. Rotating on x, y, and z. Rotation is the most complex of these transformations because it involves the use of the sine and cosine trigonometric functions. If you don't, as the song says, know much about trigonometry, don't worry. You'll need to understand how the rotation formulas work in order to use them. Oh, thank goodness. I have no idea what trigonometry is. You don't even need to know how to perform the sine and cosine operations because Borland has conveniently included functions for doing so in the math package included with the BC++ compiler. To access them, you only need to place the statement include math.h at the beginning of your program. Alas, these functions tend to be a bit on the slow side, but will suffice for demonstrating three-dimensional rotations in the next several chapters. Eventually, we'll develop our own high-speed trigonometric functions. Before we discuss the rotation formulas, let's look at what we mean when we say that we are going to rotate an object. When you hold an object in your hands, this book for instance, you can rotate it into any position that you wish. At the moment, you are presumably holding the book open to the second chapter with the pages of the book facing toward you and the text right side up. It would be a simple matter for you to turn the book so that the text is upside down, as in figure 221a. Though this would make it a bit difficult to read. Or you could turn the book so that the front and back covers are facing you instead of the pages, though this would also make it difficult to read. When you perform this latter rotation, you can do it in one of two different ways. By grabbing the sides of the book and rotating it sideways, as in figure 221b, or by holding the top and bottom and rotating it head over heels, as in figure 221c. Each of these rotations takes place, roughly speaking, around a point somewhere in the middle of the book, which we'll call the center of rotation. And each of these rotations takes place around one of three axes of a three-dimensional Cartesian coordinate system. Doing what comes virtually. To understand what that means, imagine that you are holding not a real book, but a virtual book, made up of a series of points in a three-dimensional Cartesian coordinate system. The x-axis of your virtual book's coordinate system runs horizontally across the pages, the y-axis runs vertically up and down the pages, and the z-axis runs straight out of the middle of the book towards the tip of your nose. See figure 222. X, Y, Z. When you rotate the book so that the text turns upside down, you're rotating it around the z-axis, almost as though the book were a wheel and the z-axis was its axle. The resemblance of the word axis to the word axle is probably no coincidence, though I seem to have misplaced my copy of the Oxford English Dictionary. Similarly, when you rotate the book head over heels, you're rotating it around the book's y-axis. When you rotate it from side to side, you're rotating it around the book's x-axis. So the one that gets fixed is the one that we're rotating around, right? Because z stays fixed when we rotate it this way. When we rotate it this way, y stays fixed, right? Sideways. Oh, head over heels would be y? No, I think that's wrong. I think there's a typo here. When you turn the book sideways, right, you're turning it like this. So the y-axis is the one that doesn't change. When you're turning it head over heels, it's the x-axis that does not change. For repellent side, their rotation on the x-axis is equivalent to pitch, rotation on the y-axis is equivalent to yaw, and rotation on the z-axis is equivalent to roll. Just as there are three ways for a line to be perpendicular to another line in a three-dimensional world, so there are three possible rotations that an object can make in 3 dimensions. And you've just tried them all in this book. Rotations around the x-axis are called, sensibly enough, x-axis rotations, around the y-axis rotations, and the z-axis rotations. A two-dimensional shape, that is, a shape defined within a two-dimensional coordinate system, can only make one kind of rotation, z-axis rotations. Ironically, this is the only type of rotations that does not change the z-coordinate of any of the vertices in an object. Since the z-coordinate of a two-dimensional object is always 0, it cannot be changed, and thus other types of rotation which do change the z-coordinate are forbidden in 2 dimensions. Degrees versus radians. Before we can perform calculations involving the rotation of objects, we must have some way of measuring rotations. Since rotated objects move in a circular motion, the obvious unit for measuring rotation is the degree. Since there are 360 degrees in a circle, an object rotated through a full circle is said to have been rotated 360 degrees. When you rotated this book so the text was upside down, you rotated it 180 degrees around the z-axis. If you had stopped halfway through this rotation, you would have rotated it 90 degrees around the z-axis. Axis thing is still bugging me. So if we're turning it sideways, that's what they mean, right? Yeah. Turning it sideways, yeah, I still think the y-axis should not change. Mathematicians, however, do not like to use degrees as a unit of angular measure. Degrees are an arbitrary unit developed by ancient astronomers and mathematicians who were laboring under the misapprehension that the year was 360 days long. Thus, the degree was supposedly the angular distance that the Earth rotated in a day, or the angular distance that the stars rotated around the Earth in a day, according to another misapprehension of ancient astronomers. Mathematicians prefer to use a unit of angular measure that actually has something to do with the mathematical properties of a circle. The unit that they favor is the radian, which is the distance around the circumference of a circle equal to the circle's radius. Most readers will recall that the relationship of a circle's diameter to its circumference is 3.4 ... better known as pi. Since the radius is half the diameter, there are 2 pi, or roughly 6.28, radians in the circumference of a circle. Figure 223 shows how the degree and radian system can both describe a circle. When you rotate this book 360 degrees, you are also rotating it 6.28 radians. The truth is, it doesn't matter which of these units we will use to measure the rotation of objects, as long as the sine and cosine routines that we are using are designed to deal with that type of unit. The sine and cosine routines in the Borland library are written to handle radians, so that's the unit of measure we will use in the early chapters of the book. Later, when we write our own sine and cosine routines, we'll invent a unit of measure equivalent to neither degrees nor radians, but more convenient for our purposes. Oh, we're making up angles? Oh, this is starting to sound pretty cool. I got it!
Tommy popped his head out of the bedroom, rushed to grab the cordless phone, and then ran back inside and shut the door behind him.
Huh.
Timmy had a brief glimpse of insight in the situation, and his eyes spread wide open. But the thought slipped his mind before he could catch it. A little disappointed, Timmy went right back to reading.
Rotation formulas. Now that we have a unit of measure for object rotations, we can look at the formulas for performing those rotations. Since we'll be constructing objects that have vertices and the lines and polygons that connect those vertices, we'll rotate objects by rotating vertices. Since a vertex is nothing more than a point in space that can be represented by a tree of Cartesian coordinates, we'll count our rotational formulas in terms of those coordinates. In effect, a rotational formula is a mathematical formula that, when applied to the coordinates of a point in space, will tell us the new coordinates of that point after it has been rotated by a given number of degrees on one of the 3 Cartesian axes around the origin point, 0, 0, of the system in which that point is defined. The best known and most widely applicable of these formulas is the one that rotates vertices around the z-axis, since it is the only one needed for rotating 2-dimensional shapes. Here is the formula for rotating the vertex of an object or any other point around the origin of the coordinate system on the z-axis. Nu x is x times cos of z angle minus y times sine of z angle. Nu y is y times cos of z angle plus x times sine of z angle. Where x and y are the x and y coordinates of the vertex before the rotation, z angle is the angle in radians through which we wish to rotate the object around the z-axis, and ux and uy are the x and y coordinates of the object. The z-coordinate is not changed by the rotation. The cos and sin functions calculate the cosine and sine of the angle, respectively. The center of rotation for this formula is always the origin of the coordinate system, which is why we define the origin of our rotating virtual book as the book's center, since that greatly simplifies calculating the rotation of the book using this formula and the formulas that follow. To rotate an object about the origin of the coordinate system, we must perform these calculations on the coordinates of all the vertices that define the object. Unlike a two-dimensional object, a three-dimensional object can also rotate on its x and y axis. Here is the formula for rotating an object around the origin of the coordinate system on the x-axis. Nu y is y times cos of x angle minus z times sine of x angle. Nu z is y times sine of x angle plus z times cos of x angle. Note that the x-axis is not changed by this rotation. Here's the formula for rotating an object around the origin of the coordinate system on the y-axis. This time, nu z is z times cos of y angle minus x times sine of y angle, and nu x is z times sine of y angle plus x times cos of y angle. By performing all these operations on all the coordinates of the vertices of an object, we obtain a brand new set of coordinates that describe the object after it has been rotated by x angle on the x-axis, y angle on the y-axis, and z angle on the z-axis. Matrix algebra. If we have a lot of vertices in an object, or even worse, more than an object, it's going to take a lot of calculations to scale, translate, and perform x, y, and z rotations on the coordinates of all the vertices of all those objects. Since the ultimate goal is to perform all of these operations in real time while animating three-dimensional objects on the video display of the computer, you might wonder if there's enough time to perform all of these calculations. The answer is maybe. Microcomputers are surprisingly fast at this kind of calculation, and I have a few tricks up my sleeve for optimizing the way in which these calculations are performed. Still, it would be nice if we had some way of reducing the calculations to be performed, especially if there was some way that the 5 transformations, scaling, translation, x, y, and z rotation, could be performed with a single set of operations instead of 5 sets. As it happens, there is. Instead of performing the transformations with the formulas given earlier in the chapter, we can perform them using matrix arithmetic, which is not as intimidating as it sounds. Matrix arithmetic is a mathematical system for performing arithmetic operations on matrices, which are roughly equivalent to the numeric array structures offered by most programming languages. Matrix operations can be substituted for most standard mathematical operations. Usually we don't want to do this because the matrix operations are a bit more complicated and therefore time-consuming than the standard operations. But matrix operations have one great advantage over standard operations. Several matrix operations can be concatenated, combined, into a single operation. Thus, we can use matrix operations to reduce our 5 transformations to a single master transformation. Building matrices. Matrices are usually presented as a collection of numbers arranged in rows and columns, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This particular matrix has 3 rows and 4 columns, and thus is referred to as a 3x4 matrix. In C++, we could store such a matrix as a 3x4 array of type int, like this. Float matrix 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. If a 3x4 array called matrix has already been declared but not yet initialized, it can be initialized into the matrix above with this series of assigned statements. Matrix 0, 0 is 1, matrix 0, 1 is 2, and so on and so forth. The 3 coordinates that describe a 3-dimensional vertex can be regarded as a 1x3 matrix, a matrix with 1 row and 3 columns. For instance, the coordinate triple xyz is equivalent to the 1x3 matrix xyz. A matrix with only 1 row or 1 column is a special name. We call it a vector. To scale, translate, or rotate the coordinates of a vector, we multiply them by a special kind of matrix called a transformation matrix. Multiplying matrices. How do we multiply a vector times a matrix? There are special rules for matrix multiplications, but we don't really need to get into them here. Suffice it to say that if we have two vectors in a matrix declared thusly in C++, float vector 1, 3, float new vector 1, 3, float matrix 3, 3, then we can multiply vector and matrix together to produce new vector with this fragment of code. New vector 0 is vector 0 times matrix 0, 0, plus vector 1 times matrix 0, 1, plus vector 2 times matrix 0, 2. New vector 1 is vector 0 times matrix 1, 0, plus vector 1 times matrix 1, 1, plus vector 2 times matrix 1, 2. New vector 2 is vector 0 times matrix 2, 0, plus vector 1 times matrix 2, 1, times vector 2, plus vector 2 times matrix 2, 2. After executing this code, new vector will contain the product of vector times matrix. Feel free to use this code fragment in your programs should you need to multiply a 1x3 vector times a 3x3 array. Alert readers will notice that this fragment of code could also be written as a for loop in which the matrix multiplication instructions were written only once. However, unrolling the loop in this fashion speeds up the execution of the instructions since there is no overhead for the loop itself. Since these multiplication instructions will be used again and again in a time-critical portion of the flight simulator program, it's best to save as many machine cycles as possible. As it happens, we'll mostly be multiplying 1x4 vectors in 4x4 rather than 1x3 and 3x3 matrices in this book. Why? Because there are certain mathematical conveniences in doing so. This means we will need to add an extra element to our coordinate triples, turning them into coordinate quadruples. The extra element will always be equal to 1, and there is only there to make the math come out right. Thus, when we are working with matrices, our coordinate vectors will take the form xyz1. This fourth coordinate will never actually be used outside of matrix multiplication. The transformation matrices with which we'll be multiplying the vector will all be 4x4 matrices. Here's a second code fragment which will multiply a 4x4 matrix called matrix by a 1x4 vector called vector, and leave the result in a 1x4 vector called new vector. And it looks basically the same, right? It's new vector whatever index is vector 0 times matrix index 0 plus vector 1 times matrix index 1 plus vector 2 times matrix index 2 plus vector 3 times matrix index 3. Zero, 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 1, 0, 2. Now let's take a look at the transformation matrices that can be used to translate, scale, and rotate a set of coordinates. When the following 4x4 matrix is multiplied by 1x4 coordinate vector, the product vector is equivalent to the coordinate vector scaled by a scaling factor of SF. SF000, 0700, 00SF0, 00SF0, This is called a scaling matrix. If we want to get even fancier, as we will later on, we can scale by a different vector along the x, y, and z axis using this matrix. Sx000, 0sy00, 00sz0, where Sx scales along the x-axis, Sy along the y-axis, Sz along the z-axis. Thus, if we wish to make an object twice as tall but no larger than the other dimensions, we would set the Sy factor equal to 2 and the Sx and Sz factors equal to 0. We can also perform translation with matrices. The following matrix will scale a coordinate vector by the translation factors tx, ty, and tz. 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, tx, ty, tz, 1. This is called a translation matrix. Oh, I bet this is why they want the 4x4 matrix, so that the translation works out. Three kinds of rotation matrices. We can perform all three kinds of rotation with matrices. The following matrix will rotate a coordinate vector by ZA degrees on the z-axis. Cos ZA sin ZA 0, 0, minus sin ZA cos ZA 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. and so forth for the XA and YA versions. When you want to perform several of these transformations on the vertices of one or more objects, you can initialize all of the necessary matrices, multiply the matrices together, that is, concatenate them, and then multiply the master concatenated matrix by each vertex in the object or objects. How do you multiply a 4x4 matrix by another 4x4 matrix? Here's a fragment of C++ code that will do the job, multiplying matrix 1 by matrix 2 and leaving the result in a new matrix. For I from 0 to 4, for j from 0 to 4, set new matrix ij 0, and then for k from 0 to 4, define new matrix ij to be matrix 1 kj times matrix 2 ik added up to the value of the matrix ij. Okay. In addition to the transformation matrices given above, there is one more matrix that will come in handy in the chapters to come. Although it may seem silly to do so, there will be times when we need to multiply one matrix by another matrix and leave the first matrix unchanged. That is, the resulting matrix will be the same as the first matrix. If so, we must multiply the matrix by the identity matrix, which looks like this: 1 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0 1. The identity matrix is simply the matrix in which the main diagonal, the diagonal strip of numbers running from the upper left corner of the matrix to the lower right corner, consists of 1s and all the other numbers are 0s. Any matrix multiplied by the identity matrix will remain unchanged by the operation. Floating point math. Before we leave this discussion of useful mathematics, let's look at how the computer handles math operations. As you're probably aware, the C++ language offers several numeric data types. For our purposes, the most important of these are the int type and the float type. Numeric data declared as int, which is short for integer, consists of whole numbers, usually in the range from negative 32,768 to 32,767. Numeric data is declared as float, which is short for floating point, includes whole numbers in the int range, but it can also include fractional values and numbers over a wider range. We can modify these types in several ways. In particular, we can substitute the long type for the int type, which gives us a much wider range of whole numbers. Or we can define type int as unsigned int, which gives us a range of whole numbers from 0 to 65,536, rather than from negative 32,768 to 32,767. The sort of mathematical operations performed in three-dimensional animation programs usually require the floating point data type because they use fractional values. The functions that C++ uses to perform mathematical operations on floating point data can be quite slow, however, especially on a machine that doesn't have a math coprocessor installed. So we'll avoid the floating point type whenever possible. Nonetheless, by way of illustration, we'll use float data in many of the early programs that demonstrate three-dimensional transformations and animation. You'd best be warned now that these programs will be rather slow. Later, we'll rewrite this code using the long data type. This requires some clever rewriting of our programs, though, and so the better part of a chapter will be devoted to this process. In the meantime, just grit your teeth and bear with the sometimes excruciating slowness of floating point code, unless you have a math coprocessor, in which case you can smile benevolently down on those who don't. Whew, that was a lot of math. Interesting stuff, though. Like, this matrix stuff seems convenient. Weird, but convenient. Yeah, origins and planes and graphs and lines, all of that made sense. Alright. Chapter 3, Painting in 256 Colors. Unless you live in the zebra house at the zoo, when you look around you'll see colors, lots of colors. According to some estimates, the human eye can distinguish more than 16 million different colors, and there's probably a lipstick shade named after every one of them. Without color, life would be, well, colorless. So would computer graphics. Color is the single most important thing that a computer graphics programmer needs to be concerned with. As we said in Chapter 2, a computer video display is nothing more or less than a matrix of pixels. The only thing that distinguishes one pixel from a pixel next to it is color. Computer graphics programming is a matter of changing the colors of the pixels on the display in such a way as to create a meaningful and interesting patterns. Once you've learned to do that in a clean and efficient manner, you'll know everything you need to know about graphics programming. As you might guess, that's more easily said than done. Color depth versus resolution. The VGA adapter supports 9 different official graphics modes. The two most obvious attributes that distinguish one graphics mode from another are the number of pixels that can be displayed on the screen at one time and the number of colors in which each of those pixels can be displayed. The first of these attributes is called resolution, the second is sometimes referred to as color depth. Both of these attributes are important, but frequently we must choose to make one attribute more important than the other. As programmers, we generally want a large number of pixels on the screen in a great variety of colors. However, as the Rolling Stones once said, you can't always get what you want. The VGA adapter often forces us to trade off one attribute for another. Generally speaking, the more pixels we can squeeze onto the screen in a given mode, the fewer colors we're allowed. So we have to decide which is more important to us, resolution or color depth. Game designers usually opt for color depth over resolution. The standard VGA graphics adapter, which we are using for our graphics in this book, supports resolutions that can display pixel matrices as large as 640 x 480 for a total of 307,200 pixels on the screen at one time. But when working at these resolutions, we're only allowed to show pixels in 16 colors. Ironically, this lack of color depth can make the display look lower in resolution than it actually is. A block of high-resolution pixels in a single color tends to look an awful lot like one big pixel. By lowering the resolution to 320 x 200 for a total of 64,000 pixels on the screen, we gain the ability to display pixels in 256 colors, an exponential leap in color depth. The pixels in 320 x 200 mode look rather large and blocky, but the extra color depth more than compensates for the loss of resolution. More than 90% of the commercial games on the market today use the 320 x 200 x 256 color mode, designated mode 13H by the ROM BIOS. Getting into mode. Okay, so you're convinced that the 320 x 200 x 256 color mode is the way to go for the game program you want to write. How do you get the VGA adapter into mode 13H? It would be nice if you could simply call a standard C library routine to do it for you. Unfortunately, the BGI, the library of graphics routine that comes with the Borland C++ compiler, does not presently support mode 13H. And as we noted in Chapter 2, the BGI isn't really intended for producing commercial quality animation. We don't really need the BGI's help though. Every VGA adapter includes a ROM chip that has built-in routines for performing the initialization needed for the standard PC graphics mode. These routines are collectively known as the video BIOS, which we already discussed in Chapter 1. It is awkward to access the video BIOS from C++. The BIOS was meant to be accessed either indirectly through higher level instructions or from assembly language code. We'll use the later approach. Since many readers of this book will be unfamiliar with assembly language programming techniques, I'll introduce the topics in the next section, as briefly and painlessly as possible. Readers with experience in assembly language programming may want to start skimming at this point. Doing it in assembly language. An assembly language program is written using two kinds of instruction: assembly language instructions and assembler directives. Assembly language instructions represents actual machine language codes that can be executed by the CPU after they are translated by a program called an assembler. Directives give the assembler important information about how it is to process the rest of the program. Few programs are written entirely in assembly language, but it is quite common to write small assembly language modules to be included with a C++ program. These modules consist of a few assembly language procedures, or procs, which play roughly the same role as C++ functions. In fact, if properly written, these procs can be called from C++ exactly as though they were C++ functions. A proc begins with the name of the procedure, followed by the assembler directive proc like this: ASM function proc. and it must end with the name of the procedure followed by the assembler directive ANDP, like this: ASM function and ENDP. Between the proc and ENDP directives, you place a series of assembly language instructions, each of which occupies a single line of the assembly language source file. These instructions alternate with the occasional assembler directives, the names of which are usually written in uppercase letters, and with comments which must be preceded by a semicolon. The semicolon in assembler works exactly like the double slash in C++, causing the assembler to ignore everything until the next carriage return. Each instruction consists of a mnemonic, which represents a CPU operation, followed optionally by one or more operands indicating what memory locations are to be operated upon. The mnemonic is usually a 3 to 6 letter word, such as mov or push or add. Here's a typical assembly language instruction followed by a comment. Add x, length. And the comment says add x and length, leaving some in x. Most of the assembly language instructions in the proc will concern themselves with moving numerical values around in the computer's memory and performing mathematical and logical operations on those values. Often these instructions reference a special set of memory locations situated in the computer CPU itself. These memory locations, known as the CPU registers, can be considered a set of permanent integer variables. The registers we will be concerned with are named AX, BX, CX, DX, SI, DI, BP, SP, ES, DS, CS, and SS. 4 of these registers, AX, BX, CX, and DX, can be broken into 2 entry-to pairs of 8-bit variables. AX becomes AH and AL, with AH the high byte of AX and AL the low byte. BX becomes BH and BL, CX becomes CH and CL, and DX becomes DH and DL. The CPU registers are diagrammed in figure 3.1, 3-1. Alright? Assembly language pointers. Most of the CPU registers can be used for performing general arithmetic operations, such as addition and subtraction, and some of the 16-bit registers can be used as pointers to locations elsewhere in the computer's memory. Just as preceding name of a pointer variable in C++ with the indirection operation star indicates we are referencing the memory location to which that pointer is pointing, so surrounding the name of a CPU register with a square brackets indicates we're referencing the memory location to which that register is pointing, like this, bracket BX. Actually, we will need to use 2 CPU registers to point to a memory location, with one register holding the segment portion of the address and another holding the offset portion. See Chapter 1 for a discussion of segments and offsets. The segment portion must always be placed in a segment register, usually either DS or ES. You include the name of the register in brackets with the name of the register holding the offset, like this, ES:DX. When the segment is in DS, however, its name does not have to be explicitly mentioned in brackets, since the CPU uses the segment in DS by default for all data references. Let me go back to Chapter 1. Where's the register? Pointing in memory, right. So, start point. Right, you need 2 bytes for that to work, right? You need to, or I guess, 2 16-bit information, so I guess 2 bytes for each of them. Okay. the segment and the offset. To update an absolute address, it's segment colon offset. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Getting it into a register. How do you place a value in a CPU register? In C++, you would use the assignment operator equal, but this does not exist in assembly language. Instead, you must copy the value from another memory location or CPU register by using the move interaction, MOV, which should really be called a copy instruction, like this. Move AX, comma, bracket ESDX. So this copies the AX register value into the address whose first number, whose, what did it call it? The second one is the offset, the first one is the segment, right? Yeah, I think that's what they call it. We can also identify memory locations by their addresses, though it is more common to name those addresses and then identify the locations by name. For the moment, I won't discuss techniques for assigning names to locations, but you would refer to a name location like this: move cx, size, where size is a name that you assign to a 16-bit memory location. Values can be copied not only from memory locations, but from other registers, and even from the instruction itself. A value copied from an instruction is called an immediate value and is referenced like this: move dx, 1040h. This copies the value 1040h, the h indicates the values in hexadecimal, from the instruction into the dx register. When using assembly language pointers, it is sometimes necessary to specify what sort of value the pointer is pointing at. Three types of values recognized by 80x86 series CPUs are byte, 8-bit values, word, 16-bit values, and dword, double word, or 32-bit values. Thus, a pointer is either a byte PTR, which points to a byte value, a word PTR, which points to a word value, or a dword PTR, which points to a dword value. For instance, the instruction copy a word value from an address pointed to by ESBX to the AX register is move AX, word pointer to ESBX. Of course, the assembler can also figure out that ESBX must be a word pointer because you want to move the value stored there into a 16-bit register. But there will be instances when the size of the value is less obvious, and it doesn't hurt to make it explicit anyway, if only to make your code clear to somebody else reading it. There are special assembly language instructions for putting pointers into registers. An assembly language pointer actually stretches across two registers, with either ES or DS holding the segment part of the pointer, and another 16-bit register holding the offset. Does this mean we must use two move instructions to get a pointer into these two registers? Fortunately not. The 80x86 instruction set, that is the set of instructions that can be executed by CPUs in the 80x86 series, includes special instructions for loading pointers into a pair of registers. Two instructions that will be used in programs in this book are LDS and LES. The first loads the segment into the DS registers and offset into a second register. The other does the same with the ES register. For instance, if we wish to load the pointer stored at the address we've named old pointer into the ES-DX registers, we could write LES DS, old pointer. Loads in ES. I feel like this is, we should say DX, not DS. Oh, no, no, okay. It's loading the segment into ES, the offset into DS. Okay, that's fine. No, no, it should still be, because it's the ESDX register. I still think this should say DX. Assembly language odds and ends. Before you can use certain registers in a proc, that is to interface with C++ code, you must save the values stored in those registers in a section of memory called the stack. This is done by using the push instruction like this. Push ds, push di, push si. Then before the program ends, these values must be restored to the original registers in reverse order by using the pop instructions, like this. Pop si, pop di, pop ds. Some assembly language instructions have an effect on the CPU flags. These are simply isolated bits within a special register which reflect the results of instructions. For instance, the result of the subtraction instruction sub is 0, the 0 flag will be set, given a value of 1. What good does this do to you? You can give other 8086 instructions contingent on the way in which the flags are set. These instructions usually cause the CPU to begin executing instructions at a different address in memory if the flags of a particular setting. Thus, they can be used to simulate high-level if and while instructions by skipping some instruction and executing others based on the outcome of other operations, or repeating a set of instructions in a loop if the flags are set in a certain way. Commonly, these operations are preceded by comparison instruction, CMP, which checks to see if two values are equal or unequal in a certain way. For instance, the instruction CMP AXDX would compare the value of the AX and DX register. This could then be followed by a JZ instruction, which would cause the processor to jump to a new address if the 0 flag is set, i.e. the value in AX and DX are equal. This is equivalent to the C++ instruction if AX equals DX. Perhaps the fanciest of these conditional jump instructions is loop, which subtracts 1 from, decrements, the value in the CX register, and jumps to a certain address if CX doesn't equal 0. Variations on this instruction, such as loop NE and loop Z, can be made to check the value of a flag and terminate the loop when a certain flag setting is detected, even if CX has not yet been decremented all the way to 0. These instructions can be used to produce structure similar to high-level while and for loops. Occasionally, assembly language procedures must call other procedures, the way in which C++ functions call other functions. This is done via the call instruction, which must be followed by the name of the procedure being called, like this. Call other procedure. The assembler translates the name of the procedure being called into the actual address at which the code for the procedure resides in memory. Finally, every assembly language procedure must end with the ret instruction and the ENDP directive. Although NP and procedure tells the assembler that the procedure is over, the ret return instruction causes the CPU to return control of the program to C++ when the assembly language procedure is complete. The return instruction is equivalent to the C++ return instruction, as well as the final curly brackets at the end of a C++ function. There is a great deal more to know about assembly language, and we can only scratch the surface in this book. For the confusion, I'll explain the few relevant assembly language concepts as they arise. For now, we will mention only one more: how to pass parameters from C++ to assembler. Passing parameters to assembly language procedures. In C++, you can pass parameters to a function by placing the values of those parameters in parentheses after the function call, like this. Get lost, parentheses 23, skidoo. You'll pass parameters to assembly language procedures in exactly the same way. But how does the assembly language function receive the parameters? In C++, you would simply write a parameter list in the function header, specifying the types of parameters and the names by which you wish to refer to them. In assembler, it's not quite that easy. When the assembler procedure begins, the parameters will be in the stack. To fetch these parameters from the stack, you need to know exactly how C++ organizes those parameters on the stack. But Turbo Assembler, and most other Microsoft-compatible assemblers for IBM-compatible computers, provides a simple method of accessing parameters, the the ARG directive. No, ARG isn't what you say when you stub your toe against your computer desk. It's a directive that tells the assembler which parameters you expect to be passed from C++, the order in which those parameters will be passed, and the number of bytes that each parameter will occupy. In return, the assembler allows you to refer to those parameters by name rather than by location on the stack. The ARG directive works like this. ARG first param colon byte, comma second param colon word, comma third param colon word. This tells the assembler to expect three parameters, first, second, and third param, to be passed to the procedure from C++. It also tells the assembler how much memory each of these parameters will occupy. The first will occupy 1 byte, as indicated by the word byte attached to the name of the parameter by a colon. The second 2 bytes, or 1 word, and the third 4 bytes, or 1 D word. Other sizes can be specified, but these are the only ones that we'll use in this book. Once the ARG directive has been placed at the beginning of the procedure, just after the proc directive, you can refer to these parameters by name. The one catch is that the following pair of instructions must be included at the beginning of any procedure that uses the ARG directive. Push BP, move BP, SP. Place these two instructions before any other push instructions are executed. These instructions set up the BP register as a pointer to the stack area where the parameters are stored. The assembler will translate all references to these parameters into pointers using the BP register. For this reason, you should never use the BP register in any procedure that has an ARG directive. Move BP SP. So push BP. Okay, yeah. Near the end of the procedure, after all other pop instructions have been executed, include the following instruction: pop BP. This restores the BP register back to the value it was previously storing. Most likely, the C++ function that called the assembly language procedure was also using the BP register as a pointer to parameters stored on the stack, which is why it is important that the value be returned intact at the end of the procedure. Is it possible for an assembly language procedure to return a value the way that the C++ function can? Sure it is. And the assembly language procedure can do anything that a C++ function can, and occasionally a bit more. The way in which a value is returned from an assembly language procedure depends on what type of value it is. For instance, values of type int, or any other 16-bit values, are returned in the AX registers. The value must be placed in the AX register before the procedure terminates. Larger and smaller values are returned using similar techniques. And now, with the assistance of these few assembly language procedures, we can consider how to access the video BIOS. Accessing the video BIOS. Accessing the routines in the video BIOS from an assembly language procedure, you must use the 8086 int instruction. The int instruction is similar to the call instruction, except that it calls a subroutine by using a software interrupt. Int for interrupt. That is, it tells the computer to look in a certain location of the computer's memory, note the address that is stored there, and execute the subroutine found at that address. These addresses are stored in the computer's memory during the initialization period that takes place just after the computer is turned on or rebooted. The particular address at which the computer looks is determined by the number following the interrupt instruction. The action of the interrupt instruction is shown in figure 3.2. The video BIOS functions are accessed by the instruction int10h. The int10h goes to a specific address. The address 10 hex, I guess. And from there, there is a specific location in memory set there, and we go there, and the subroutine starts. Executing software interrupt number 10H causes the computer to look in the memory location that contains the address of the video BIOS code. This in turn causes the computer to begin executing that code. However, simply executing the interrupt 10H instruction doesn't tell the video BIOS what you want it to do. You must also pass it additional information by placing that information in the CPU registers. The video BIOS is capable of executing several different functions. Each function is identified by a number. You place the number of the desired function in CPU register AH before calling the video BIOS. The function that sets the video mode is function 0, so to call it you place a 0 in the AH register before executing interrupt 10H. It is necessary to tell this function which video mode you wish to set, so you must also place the mode number in the AL register. In assembly language, all of those things can be done in 3 instructions, like so. Move 0 in AH, move 13H in AL, interrupt 10H. In the course of this book, we'll put together a short library of assembly language procedures that we can link to our C++ code to support the basic screen operations we'll need in our programs. Since calling the ROM BIOS is a task best performed in assembly language, we'll include a procedure for setting the video mode equivalent to the C++ function shown earlier. The procedure function callable from C++ is in listing 3.1. I should actually probably save a bookmark here. Set gmode int mode. Set VG adapter to BIOS mode. Set gmode procedure. Arg mode word. So you're getting the code word mode, which is a word. You push BP, move SP BP, which is what gets the procedure and sets up the stack pointer. Move mode in AX, move 0 in AH, call the interrupt, and then pop that BP and return. Sets gmode NP. As you can see, this procedure uses several of the techniques we talked about earlier in this chapter. The arg directive tells the assembler that the procedure expects a single 16-bit parameter, referred to as mode. The first 2 instructions set up the stack area so that this parameter will be correctly referenced by the assembler. The last 2 instructions restore the BP register and return to the calling function. In between, interrupt 10H is called after loading mode into the CPU register AX and function number 0 into AH. The only thing that may be confusing is why the mode value is moved into AX rather than just AL. We do this because mode will be passed as a parameter of type int from C++, and we might as well load the entire 16-bit integer into AX, since the low 8-bit of the parameter will be only the low 8-bit of the parameter will be used, there being no video modes with numbers greater than 255. Thus, the mode number still winds up in the AL register where it belongs. This procedure can be found in the file screen.asm in the included disk. We'll talk about more of the procedures from that file in this and later chapters. To use the procedure in that file from a program being developed in the Borland Integrated Development Environment, IDE, put screen.asm or screen.obj if you already compiled it to an object file into your .prj file and include the file screen.h at the top of each module of your program that requires the routines. The file screen.h contains C++ prototypes for all of the assembly language procedures in screen.cpp, showing the compiler how these procedures are to be called as C++ functions. This particular procedure can be called from C++ like this: set gmode 0x13. This example would set the video mode to mode 0x13, the 320 x 200 x 256 color graphics mode. Be warned, when you set the video mode, it stays set. When the user exits the program, the video display will still be in whatever mode you've switched it to, which can make a mess of the screen. As a matter of courtesy and professionalism, you need to save the previous video mode before setting a new mode so that you can restore it on exit from the program. Okay, so you should include screen.asm into your project file Every time you use one of the functions, include screen.h. And if you want to read everything about it, you can just look at screen.cpp. Restoring the video mode. Fortunately, the authors of the IBM operating system chose to store the number of the current video mode at memory location 0400:0049. As explained in Chapter 1, you can retrieve the contents of a memory location by creating a pointer to that location using the makeFarPointer mk_fp macro, which is also defined in dos.h. The following statement sets the integer variable old mode to the value of the current video mode. Int old mode equals pointer int pointer make var pointer at 0x40, 0x49. You'll notice that in the statement we've both declared an integer variable and set it equal to the value at a memory location. This is legal in C++, where we can declare a variable at the time of first use, rather than in a block of declarations at the head of the function. The variable will remain in scope until the end of the block in which it was declared. A program block in C is a sequence of programs lines that begins and ends with curly brackets. If we declare this variable at the beginning of the main function, it will remain in scope throughout the program. Why is 0x40, 0x49 this? Right, because the top byte is reserved for the sign. Right? So, going back to chapter 1 and addresses. There's only five hex digits to make up an address. I guess when we do more practice, it's going to become easier to understand how to turn an address into a hex and vice versa. Let's keep reading. Where were we? Here. Okay. You'll also notice that we've used the typecast int in front of the makeFarPointer macro so that the compiler will know that we want the value returned by the macro to be of type int. The typecast, as you recall from chapter 1, tells the computer to treat an expression of one type as an expression of a different type. Once we've set old mode equal to the previous video mode, we can restore the video mode on exit from the program calling setGmode with old mode as a parameter. The following skeletal main function will set the video mode at the beginning of the program and restore the original mode before terminating. Include -h, void main, int old mode equals pointer, int pointer, and make for pointer 0x40, 0x49, set gmode 13h, stuff, set gmode on mode. That's all there is to setting the PC's video mode. What leads us to a far more important question. Then we've set the video mode, what do we do with it? More about bitmaps. As we saw in Chapter 1, the basis behind almost all PC graphics is the bitmap, a sequence of consecutive bytes, values, and memories in which the individual binary digits, or bits, within those bytes represents the color of individual pixels on the display. If the picture being output to the video display is made up of only two colors, black and white say, only one bit is needed to represent each pixel. If a given bit equals 0, the corresponding pixel is black. If a bit equals 1, the corresponding pixel is white, or vice versa. See figure 3.3 for an illustration. Turn in a byte of video memory into black and white, sure. When in graphics mode, the VGA adapter scans an area of memory called the video RAM, VidRAM for short, and interprets what it finds there as a bitmap of an image to be displayed on screen. It then outputs that image to the video monitor, like a miniature television station sending a picture to a television set. In the case of VGA 256 color mode, the bitmap is a little bit more complicated than simple 0 equals black, 1 equals white scheme outlined above, but only a little. Because each pixel on the Mode 13H display can take 256 possible colors, each must be represented in memory by 8 bits, or 1 byte, since a byte can take 256 possible values. This is a convenient arrangement because computer memory is normally organized into individual bytes. In Mode 13H, video memory is not so much a bitmap as a byte map, though I'll continue referring to it here as a bitmap. Figure 3.4 illustrates this arrangement. The actual pixel color represented by a given byte value in the bitmap depends on the current setting of the VGA color registers, which we'll discuss in a moment. Finding the bitmap. When we place the video adapter into Mode 13H, the bitmap for the display is automatically placed at address A0. Although some of the VGA and EGA and CGA graphics mode allow the bitmap to be moved to other locations, Mode 13H does not. It always begins at this address. The byte at A00 represents the color of the pixel in the upper left corner of the display. The next byte in memory, location A1, represents the color of the pixel to the immediate right of the pixel, and so on for the first 320 bytes of the bitmap. The 320th byte at location A:13F represents the pixel in the upper right corner of the display. The bitmap continues with the second rough pixel with the next byte at location A140, representing the pixel immediately beneath the pixel in the upper left corner of the display. The byte at A:141 represents the pixel to the immediate right of that one, and so on and so forth. There are 64,000 pixels on the Mode 13H display, therefore the bitmap for the display is 64,000 bytes long, continuing from address A0 to address A:FBFF. As you've probably already guessed, the last byte of the bitmap at A0:FBFF represents the color of the pixel in the bottom right corner of the display. Drawing pictures in memory. Accessing the individual bytes in this bitmap from a C program is so delightfully simple that there might be a law against it in several of the more regressive states of the Union. Check your local statute books before attempting this at home. All I have to do is read the 64,000 bytes from A0 to A:FBFF as though they were a large array of type car, then assign values to the bytes that in that array to change the color of the pixels on screen, or read the value of the bytes in that array to read the value of the pixels on the screen. To create the array, you first need to establish a far pointer that points to the first byte of the bitmap. Car far pointer screen equals car far pointer Okay, so okay. So this is saying what follows should be typecast as car far pointer. Let's double check chapter one, but I bet that's what that is that I forgot. Far pointer just have like bigger values. Okay, here's the typecast. Did I not talk about typecast? Pixel resolution, IBM graphics, video modes, blah blah blah. Memory, bit bytes, and binary. Sure. Addresses, pointing at memory. Aha, here. We use the typecast here to tell the compiler we wish the value that follows to be treated as a. Okay. Do they explain what make far pointer does? Give it two hexes, and it gives you a character value. Hmm. What did they just say about the make far pointer macro? Creating a pointer to that location. Mhm. Okay. So this is saying we should think of it as an integer pointer, and then all mode is the value that is pointed at by the address given by this. Okay. Um. So here we're saying that we're point the address of screen is the bitmap found at the far character at address A000 offset 0. All right. Makes sense. Once this is done, you can read and write the individual bytes of the bitmap as though they were elements of a 64,000 element array of type character called screen. Obviously, you can use the name of your choice for this array in your own programs. For instance, if you set the pixel in the upper left corner of the mode 13H display to color 167, you would use the statement screen 0 equals 167. Is that simple or what? Right, okay, so this tells you where the bitmap is located. And then you're saying, hey, screen should start at the address where the bitmap is located. And make far pointer just takes two hex numbers and turns them into something that can be interpreted as a memory address. Okay. Clearing the screen. Suppose, for instance, that you wish to clear the entire mode 13H display to the background color, an operation you will generally perform during program initialization. Background color in mode 13H is always represented by color 0. Thus, you can clear the screen with a simple for loop like so. For unsigned int I equals 0, I smaller than 64,000, I plus plus, screen I equals 0. You'll notice that we've once again used the C++ convention of declaring a variable at the time of use. Further, we've declared the variable I as type unsigned int so it can take value in the range 0 to 65,535. If you should inadvertently omit the unsigned keyword from a similar declaration, your program will go in an infinite loop as the value of I tries and fails to reach 64,000. Which could leave you with a screen that's half cleared and a user with one finger on the reset button. Alternatively, you could declare I to be of type long, which would possibly give it a range of 4 billion values, but which would also take slightly longer to process. Clearing the screen is the sort of thing that might be done, that may need to be done very quickly in a program such as a flight simulator, which draws on the video display in real time. For maximum speed, an assembly language function for clearing the video display has been included in the file screen.asm and in listing 3.2. Screen width EQU320, screen height EQU200, CLS car far pointer screen underscore ADR. Clear video memory of screen buffer at screen ADR to zeros. The procedure itself takes argument screen, which is double, pushes BP as usual, then moves the stack to BP. We push DI, we save the DI register. We load the value of screen, which is a double word, into the registers ES and DI. We move screen width divided by 2 times screen height to CX. Okay, so screen width times height divided by 2. Saved in CX. 0 in AX. Rep STOSW. I don't know what that means. And then we pop stuff back and return. So the question is, what does rep... This is definitely a repeat. But STOSW, what does that mean? Let's take a look at what this procedure does and how it does it. At the head of the procedure is a pair of EQU statement. EQU is an assembler directive similar to the const instruction in C++, or the sharp-defined preprocessor directive that C++ inherited from C. It sets a symbol equal to a value. In this case, it set the symbol screen width equal to 320 and the symbol screen height equal to 200. These symbols can now be used in our program in place of those values. The ARG directive tells us the procedure requires a single parameter, which is a pointer to the video display that we've called screen. The video memory is always at the same address. Why does this procedure need a pointer to its location? There will be times when it's necessary to assemble the video image in a special memory buffer and then move the completed image to video RAM after it is complete. In fact, this very technique will be used in the program that we develop in the next chapter. Ooh, we're getting to develop it. I might get to actually implement this in my computer pretty soon. On such occasions, the clear screen function will be passed the address of the off-screen buffer rather than the address of video memory, so that the off-screen buffer can be cleared instead of the display. You'll notice that the same technique of passing a pointer to a screen is used in many of the screen-oriented functions we'll develop later on. Alright, so sometimes you don't build everything automatically, we just build it somewhere else, and so we just want to point it there. Okay. The first 3 instructions of the procedure set up the BP register as pointer to the parameters on the stack and save the DI register. None of the other registers except for BP need to be saved. less DI screen instruction loads the full 32-bit screen pointer into the ESDI register. The next instruction, move CX, screen width divided by 2 times screen height, may look a little odd to you since it includes such high-level operators as the division and the multiplication operators. These are actually assembler directives. The object of this instruction is to copy the total number of pixels on the display divided by 2 in the CX register. Instead of calculating this number ourselves, we use the 2 symbols we created earlier to calculate this value. The instructions that will actually be assembled here is move CX comma 32,000. In a moment, it will become clear why we are loading this value into this particular register. Next, the value of 0 is copied into the AX register, and a rep STOSW instruction is executed. What is a rep STOSW instruction? It is one of the 8086 string instructions, which are actually extremely tight and fast assembly loops for manipulating strings of data in the computer's memory. The instruction creates a string of identical 16-bit numbers in a sequence of memory addresses, starting with the address pointed to by the ESDI registers. The count of 16-bit numbers in the string is whatever has been stored in the CX register, and the actual 16-bit number placed in that sequence of addresses is the number in the AX register. In this case, the rep STOSW instruction will store 32,000 16-bit 0 values at the address we have passed in the parameter screen. Since we're storing 16-bit value rather than 8-bit values, that's equivalent to 64,000 addresses, precisely enough to fill out video memory or an off-screen buffer with zeros, effectively clearing it. This procedure is called from C++ like this: CLS screen address, where screen address is a far pointer up to an array of type char. We wrote in this function assembly language rather than C because there may be times when we need to clear the display in a hurry, and the STOSW instruction is generally faster than a for loop in C. How much faster? It depends on which model of 8086 processor your program is running on. The earlier processors in the 8086 series, such as the 8088 and 8086, string instructions were much faster than alternative form of loops. On later processors such as 8286 and 8386, the string instructions are still faster but by a smaller margin. On the 8486, there are alternative loop forms that are as fast or faster than the string instruction, so writing such a routine in machine language becomes less important on the 8486, though we have no guarantee that our C compiler is actually producing the most efficient possible machine language translation of our loop. Until most game players own machines based on the 8486 processor, it will be advantageous to use string instructions such as STOSW for potentially time-consuming operations like clearing the screen. Of course, at the rate things are going, it may not be long before this event comes to pass. It's a bummer. I mean, it's good to have a 486, but I guess, it's kind of weird to learn these best practices when things are going to be out of date very soon. Lots and lots of colors. Now we know that changing the colors of pixels on the video display is simply a matter of putting the right numbers in the right locations in video RAM. But how do we know what numbers represent which colors? When we set a location in the bitmap to a value of 10, for example, how do we know which color pixel the number 10 represents? The answer is that the number 10 can represent any color that we want it to represent out of the overall palette of 256 colors permitted by the VGA adapter. See figure 3.6. We tell the VGA adapter what colors are represented by what numbers by placing the appropriate values in the VGA color registers, which I discussed briefly in Chapter 1. To recap, the color registers are a set of memory registers on the VGA adapter itself that contain the 256 colors of the VGA palette. There are 256 color registers on the VGA board, and each register contains a description of one of the colors in the palette. So register 10 would be 6 red, 61 green, 18 blue. Setting the palette. There are at least 2 ways to alter the values of the VGA color registers. Usually, unless we need to change the color registers in a great hurry, we can ask the video BIOS to perform this complicated task. Once again, we call int 10h as we did in setting the video mode. Setting the VGA color registers is performed by function 10h, subfunction 12h of the video BIOS. So we call it by placing a value of 10h in register AH and a value of 12h in register AL. There is no need to set all of the color registers with a single call to this function. If we choose, we can set only a few. This means, however, that we must tell the video BIOS which registers we wish to change and what values we want them to have. We place the number of consecutive color registers we wish to change in register CX, the first register to be set in BX, and a pointer to an array of color values in ESDX. The array of color values is simply an array of type char in which every 3 bytes contain a color descriptor for a register. Okay. BX is the first set. CX is the number of colors we want to change. And then the array of color values in ESDX tells us how to change it. Okay. As we discussed in Chapter 2, each color on the VGA display can be described by 3 8-bit values that represent the blue, green, and red components of the color, where each value is a number from 0 to 63. The first byte of the color descriptor represents the intensity of the red component, the second the intensity of the green component, and the third the intensity of the blue component. To the 256 color register, create an array of char with 768 elements, in which the first 3 elements contain the color descriptor for color number 0, the second 3 are color number 1, and so forth. Shown in listing 3.3 is our assembly language program in screen.h that will call the video BIOS for us. Set palette uses a var character pointer color register, an integer first register, and an integer number of registers. So it only takes one argument, which is double registers. Push BP, move BPSP as usual. Go to the address, store in ESDX the address of registers. Which is what was at color regs, I think. Yeah. No. This is just the argument. This is just our starting point. So we store this there. We move 10h in AH, which is gonna initialize the function 10h of the BIOS, and AL 12h. Oh, good. High and low bits in A. So AX is gonna control the functions, and it's gonna be 10, 12. I see. Okay. 0 in BX. 100h in CX. 156 would be 100h, so this means them all. Interrupt at 10h, calling the video BIOS, pop BP, and return. So the pointer gives me the double word that's part of the argument. Was that the same thing for green ADR? Was the same. What was the other one? This was an int, so you just got a word. But then what happens to First reg and num regs. I guess if you don't define them, they're set at 0 to start. We can call this function with C statement set palette color regs, where color regs is a far pointer to an array of character containing the color descriptors. To change all 256 registers to the color values in the car array color regs, you should write set palette color regs 0 to 56. No. Okay. Hold on. So a double word would be these two. I guess the point is that subfunction 12h of the video BIOS, which we don't go into description, would know what to do with the stuff, and it registers ES DX. This should not be SX, I assume. That's annoying. I would like to understand more how this video BIOS thing works. I feel like this is one of those, like, trust me, bro, it works, but I don't. And that's all there is to in the VGA palette. Well, okay, maybe it isn't that easy, but it's conceptually simple. Creating an array with 256 color descriptors in it isn't as trivial as I've made it sound, but there's an easy way to do it. The default palette. For some applications, you don't need to set the VGA color registers at all. When you boot up your computer, the operating system sets the palette to a standard set of values called the default palette. With the set of graphic routines we've developed so far, it's a simple matter to write a program that lets us look at the default palette. Such a program appears in listing 3.4. This program is available on the accompanying disk as rainbow.exe. Rainbow.cpp to display the default VGA palette includes standard input-output, con.io, DOS, screen.h2, screen.h as well. Clear anything that's at far pointer address A000, 0. Save the previous video mode, which is stored at 4049. Set current mode to 0x13. Point to video memory. Sure. The difference is now they're using a far character. I have to go back to chapter 1 again. What's the difference between car and far car variables? Near pointers can only point at values within a 64K range. Far pointers can point at values anywhere in the first megabyte of the computer's memory. Alright. So most of them are supposed to be far pointer anyway. Alright, so we create a pointer to video memory. It's a screen pointer that points to address A000, 0. Loop through all the pixels in a column, loop through all the 256 color. Put one pixel of each color in each column. Screen I times 320 plus J equals J. While not keyboard hit, don't do anything. So when keyboard hit moves out, and then reset all mode and exit to DOS. First, just clear the screen by calling the CLS function in screen ASM. Then we set the video mode to 13H by calling set gmode function from the same file. To obtain access to the video RAM, we create a far pointer called screen that points to the start of VidRAM. Then we use a pair of nested for loops to access VidRAM. The first loop uses the index I to iterate through all 200 lines of the video display, while the second loop uses the index J to iterate through the 320 pixels on each line. The statement screen I times 320 plus J calculates the position of the next pixel on each line and sets it equal to the value of J. The result is a series of 256 vertical stripes from the top of the display to the bottom, each in one of the 256 default palette colors. The output of the program is shown in figure 3.7, albeit in shades of gray rather than color. Not only is the result rather pretty, but it shows you what the default VGA palette colors look like. Because there are only 256 colors in the VGA palette, we've only colored the first 256 vertical lines on the VGA display. If this strikes you as a bit unbalanced, you can color the entire display by changing the second for loop to read for int j equals 0, j smaller than 320 j++. Then the first 64 colors will be repeated on the last 64 stripes of the display. I kind of want to try this straight up. Alright, let me go boot the PC. And then make sure I put the diskette from book in A. Oh, right, no, right. I don't need a diskette. It's in CD Timothy. Oh, no, CD FF. Here. General? Rainbow. Oh, wow. So the number of colors is actually pretty limited, but then they have to come in a lot of like different brightness shades. To make the brightness and shading, there's your grayscale here in the middle, cyan, magenta, yellow, blue, red, green, and then in the middle they kind of sort of like blend too. Well, that was cool. Okay. What we've done here is to create a bitmap in video RAM with each of the 256 VGA colors represented in a repeating pattern. Now let's look at a way to create bitmaps that are a little more complex. Storing bitmaps. It's good to know how to create a bitmap in video RAM, but if that bitmap doesn't contain a picture of something, it doesn't help a lot. Painting the entire VGA palette on the display as a series of multicolored vertical lines is an interesting exercise, but it doesn't do us much good in creating computer games. So how do you go about creating the bitmap? Here's a program that allows you to paint images on the screen of the computer and store them on the disk as bitmaps. There's not enough space in this book to develop such a paint program, and it's a bit far afield from our subject matter. Fortunately, there are a number of excellent paint programs available commercially. The artwork used in the programs in this book was developed with a program called Deluxe Paint 2 Enhance from Electronic Arts. I highly recommend this program, though there are a number of other programs on the market of equal worth. Figure 3H shows a typical screen from DP2E. If you're serious about developing computer games of commercial quality, you should consider purchasing such a program. And if you plan to use the paint program with any of the utilities we created in this chapter, make sure the program is capable of generating PCX file, which I'll discuss later in this chapter, or that you have a utility that will convert other files to PCX files. Many paint programs come with such conversion utilities. Compressing bitmaps. In what form do paint programs store bitmaps on the disk? You might guess that a paint program would store an image on the disk as a 64,000 byte file containing a byte by byte bitmap of the image. This, however, is rarely the case. Disk space is limited, and straightforward bitmap is rarely the most efficient way to store an image. More often, the bitmap is stored in a compressed format. Compressing a bitmap so that it takes up less space on the disk is surprisingly easy to do. Bitmaps created with a paint program tend to contain large areas in a single color, so that much of the information in the bitmap is redundant. For instance, if the bitmap contains a horizontal line in which 100 pixels are all in a shade of blue represented by the number 45, the uncompressed bitmap will contain 100 bytes in a row with the value of 45. Ordinarily, these 145s would require 100 bytes of disk storage, but storing them as such would be repetitive and wasteful. We can store these 100 bytes much more efficiently by using a system known as run length encoding, or RLE for short. Using RLE, we can store a run of a given number of identical pixels in just two byte-sized numbers, the first of which represents the number of pixels in the run, and the second of which represents the value of pixels in the run. For instance, we could store our 45s as a pair of numbers, 145. We then use a decompression program later to expand these bytes back into their original form. Figure 3.9 illustrates the translation of runs of bytes into a file into RLE pairs, depicting a cat. Makes sense. Not very good illustration if it's not the whole thing, but I understand what they mean there. It's not hard to imagine a file containing a bitmap that consists of nothing but a pair of bytes like the above. For instance, if we wish to store a bitmap that consisted of a run of 37 bytes of value 139, 17 of 211, 68 of value 17, we would create a file consisting of only 6 bytes, 37, 137, 17 to 11, 68, and 17. That's an extremely efficient way to store a bitmap. Actual bitmaps, however, don't compress quite this easily. Although the typical bitmap created with a paint program, as opposed for instance to a bitmap created by digitizing a photograph, may contain many runs of single color pixel, bitmaps also frequently contain sequences of differently colored pixels. RLE is not a particularly efficient way to encode single byte values. For instance, if a sequence of 6 bytes in the bitmap consisted of the values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, an RLE scheme would store them as 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 6, where each byte is encoded as a run of only a single value. This actually doubles the amount of disk space necessary to store these bytes. What we want is a way to turn RLE off and on the file as we need it, so we can store some bytes in a straightforward bitmap and use RLE compression on other bytes. When we encounter a run of multiple bytes of the same value in a file, we want to use RLE to store it. But when we encounter a sequence of dissimilar bytes, we can turn RLE off. We could invent our own scheme to do this, but there's no reason to do so. Not quite yet, anyway, because there are a number of existing methods that do the job well enough. However, we'll still need a compression scheme in some cases to handle the data once it has been loaded from the disk file. Graphics file formats. Deluxe Paint 2 Enhanced uses two different methods for encoding files on the disk. One of these, the IFF format, recognizable by the extension .lbm on the files, derives from the Amiga computer on which DP2E was originally written. The second method, called PCX encoding, recognizable by the extension .pcx on the files, runs with a number of other PC programs. In fact, the PCX format was originally developed for a PC Paint program called PC Paintbrush from Zsoft. We'll use the PCX format to store bitmaps on the disk. There are several PCX images stored on the disk that came with this book. Because we're storing bitmaps in PCX format, we'll need a set of subroutines to read PCX files from the disk and decompress them into a format we can display on the screen. In fact, this is a good opportunity to learn to use some of the VGA graphic techniques we've discussed in this chapter and create a useful program in the process. For the remainder of this chapter, we'll develop a loader viewer program that reads PCX files off the disk and displays them on the screen in mode 13H. The PCX file format is quite versatile. It can be used to store images of different sizes, created in a number of PC graphics mode. For simplicity's sake, though, we'll restrict our PCX routines to handling full screen 256 color mode 13H image. OOP PCX file loader. This is also an opportunity to dip our toes into C++ object-oriented programming. We'll create a class called PCX so that we can easily make multiple PCX objects, which will read PCX files off the disk and store them in a 64,000 byte buffer designated by the call-in program. To be honest, there is no compelling reason to make the PCX routines a class. We're doing so here primarily to introduce the reader to some of the unique features of C++ syntax. In the next chapter, we'll develop a more representative C++ class. There's really only one thing that we need a PCX class to do for us: read PCX files. The PCX class will be so simple that it will consist of only 4 functions, 2 of them private to the class, and 1 variable also private. Here's the class definition, which will take place in a header file called pcx.h. Class PCX, private functions and variables for class PCX, int in file handle for PCX file to be loaded, bitmap loading function, int load image, which takes a PCX file and a PCX struct, star pointer at PCX, and a palette loading function, void load palette, which takes the PCX file and again the PCX struct. Public function variables for class PCX. Function to load PCX data, int load, which takes a file name, which is a var character, and a PCX structure. And a function to compress PCX bitmap, which is int compress, taking a PCX struct. Alright, that's where we're going to dive deep into this, huh? All those parts of the definition declared as private are exclusive to the class PCX and can only be used within the PCX module. Functions and variables declared as public, on the other hand, are available to all other modules that are linked with this one. As far as the other modules are concerned, the class header consists of only 2 functions, load and compress, because these are the only parts of the class accessible to them. Inside a PCX file. The 256 color VGA PCX file consists of a 128-byte header, followed by a compressed bitmap and 768 bytes of color descriptors composing the palette used for the bitmap. The 128-byte header consists of several fields describing attributes of the PCX file, such as the color depth and the width and breadth of the image, plus 58 bytes of padding to round the header out to a full 128 bytes. The PCX header might be expanded later, so this 58 bytes of padding will contain valid information about the file. Although we'll make little use of the PCX header in our programs, we can define it as a C structure so that we can access the individual fields within the header, should that become necessary. Here's a C structure for the PCX header. So, struct PCX header, okay. It has a manufacturer car, a version car, an encoding car, bits per pixel car, xmax, xmin, ymin, xmax, ymax, top left corner, and width and height of the image, horizontal resolution and vertical resolution. There's an EGA palette that's 48 characters long, reserved stuff, color planes, bytes per line, palette type, and filler. Most of the members of the structure are irrelevant for our purposes. The manufacturer should always be 0, indicating that we're dealing with a PCX file and not some other type of file. And version should be 5, telling us the file supports 156 color graphics. You'll notice that the header data do not require that the size of the PCX bitmap be a full screen. There are fields within the header, xmin and ymin, that can be used to define an upper left coordinate for the image other than 0, 0, and fields, xmax and ymax, that can define a size for the image other than the size of the pixel matrix. This allows us to create PCX images that consist of a single rectangle plucked from a larger image. However, as we noted earlier, we're going to ignore these data fields for now and only work with PCX files containing a full screen image. If you try to use the PCX routines developed in this chapter to load an image that doesn't start in the upper left corner of the display and fill the whole screen, you'll get decidedly odd results. The PCX structure. Once a header structure is defined, it can be incorporated into a larger structure that can hold the complete PCX file, header and all. Struct PCX struct. We have a PCX header called header, an unsigned var character that points to the image, an unsigned var character that points to the compressed image. So the buffer holds a 64,000 byte bitmap. The second pointer C image points to a compressed version of the bitmap. And then we have the palette, which is 768 bytes. And then an integer for the compressed bitmap length. Obviously, the header member of the structure will hold the header of the PCX file that is therefore declared to be of the PCX header type defined above. The image member is a var pointer to an array of type car, which contains the 64,000 byte uncompressed bitmap, and the palette field is a 768 byte array containing the color register values for the bitmap. We'll take a closer look at the role of the C image pointer and the C length variable later in this chapter. In order to read the compressed bitmap from the PCX file into the image array, we need to know exactly how the bitmap is encoded in the file. Fortunately, the PCX RLE scheme is quite simple. To understand it, you need to view the compressed bitmap as data as a stream of bytes, portions which are completely uncompressed and portions which are compressed using a form of rung length encoding. How is RLE toggled on and off in the stream? So recall that RLE generally takes the form of byte pairs, in which the first byte is a run length value representing the number of times the byte is to be repeated in the uncompressed bitmap, and the second value is the value to be repeated. I bet, not having read ahead, that it's going to be, if it's a single number, it's just the color and a single byte. If it's a pair of numbers, it's the bitmap. It's the RLE encoding. In a compressed PCX bitmap, a byte value in the range 192 to 255. Oh, no, okay, never mind. In the compressed PCX bitmap, a byte value in the range 192 to 255 signals the start of an RLE pair. When a byte in this range is encountered in the stream, it should be regarded as a run length value that has 192 added to it. To decompress this run of bytes into a usable bitmap, we first need to subtract 192 from this byte, and then use the remainder as a run length count. Finally, we must read the next byte from the stream, and repeat that byte the number of times specified by the run length count. Bytes that are not in the range 193 to 255 should be copied into the bitmap without change. So we just have, I guess, 192 bytes to work with, though, for the non-repeated ones. It makes sense, right? If 192 means it's a run of, well, I guess 192 itself would just be a run of 0, and 193 would be a run of 1, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. But like 200 would be a run length of 8. And the number that follows. Oh, okay. So it's listed. Well, it's kind of like that, except that to kind of like what I mentioned, except that to avoid having singletons and pairs, which would be tricky to handle, it's just a list of numbers. But if a number is bigger than a certain amount, the number that follows has a different meaning. Okay. PCX limitations. This raises a couple of interesting questions. Most obviously, how does the PCX format encode bytes of an uncompressed bitmap that are in the range 192 to 255? Wouldn't these bytes be mistaken for run length values? Yes, they would, so the PCX encoding scheme, that is the program that created the PCX file in the first place, must encode these bytes as though they were single byte runs. This is done by preceding the value of the byte with a value of 193. Okay, yeah, okay, because 193, 200 means, oh, this is a multi-run byte of 1 with caller 200. Okay. What makes the scheme clever is that we don't have to worry about the special case when writing a PCX decoding program. The routines that we write for decoding runs of bytes will handle these single byte runs automatically, the same way they handle longer runs of bytes. Here's another question that comes to mind. If 192 must be subtracted from a byte to obtain a run length count, how does a PCX file encode runs longer than 63 bytes? The answer is that a PCX file can't encode longer runs. Rather, longer runs of bytes are broken up into multiple run length pairs. A run of 126 identical bytes, for instance, will be encoded as 2 runs of 63 bytes. To sum up, we can decode the bitmap portions of a PCX file with this algorithm. Read a byte from the bitmap. If the value is in the range 0 to 191, transfer the byte into the bitmap buffer unchanged. If the byte is in the range 192 to 255, subtract 192 from the value of the byte. The result is the run length count of the following byte. Read another byte from the file and repeat it a number of times in the bitmap buffer. Repeat the process until the entire bitmap has been decompressed. Now we need a function that will load the PCX information from disk. The load function or PCX class loads a PCX file into a buffer. The buffer must be of type PCX struct and is passed to the function as a pointer. The text of the function is in listing 3.5. So int PCX load, I guess this is just how we state that this is part of the PCX class. And then we'll do a var character that points to the file name and a PCX struct that points to a PCX struct. So you're going to open the file and return non-zero value on error. Open file name. This is probably something that we don't know yet. Okay. Move file pointer to start of header. Read header from PCX file. You're going to do read len, read in file and PCX arrow header. Then we look at the size of the PCX header. Decompress bitmap and place in buffer, returning non-zero value if error occurs. If we don't load image in file PCX, return -1. Decompress palette and store in array, load palette in file PCX. close int file, return 0. We must first declare an instance of the class PCX. The earlier definition of this class only created a template for the class. Declaring an instance actually creates an object of the class which can be used to load PCX files. We declare an instance of the class in much the same way we would declare an ordinary C variable, PCX loader. We then must call the function load and pass the file name and a variable type PCX like this. PCXloader.load, PCX file.pcx is the file name, and then ampersand PCX buffer is the struct. In C++, the dot operator separates the name of a member function of the class from the name of an object of that class. Thus, the name PCXloader.load tells the compiler, as well as the reader of the program, that we're calling the member function load of the class PCX to which the object PCXloader belongs. Clear so far. Notice that we must pass the address of the PCX struct using the address operator ampersand in the form of ampersand PCX struct to this function and not the variable itself. That's because the load function actually alters the content of the variable. Thus, it must gain access to the variable itself rather than receiving a copy on the stack. The load function accesses members of the structure by differencing a pointer to it using the indirection operator. The syntax for accomplishing the differencing may look a little peculiar if you've never seen it before. The header member of the structure, for instance, is accessed like this: PCX and then dash bigger, which is kind of just a stylized header. It tells the compiler that header is a field within the structure to which PCX is currently pointing. So we're giving it a PCX file. So header is part of the PCX struct and has a struct itself, a PCX header. And then I don't know what the size of is meant to do. I guess it's just reading the whole thing. If it doesn't work, you return -1. Otherwise, you decompress the palette. Load image and load palette being two private functions of the PCX class. All right. Where did I? Right here. Reading the bitmap and the palette. The load member function calls two additional functions, load image and load palette, that are private to the class PCX. These functions load the PCX file's bitmap into the array image and load the PCX file's color description into the array palette, respectively. The text of these functions appears in listing 3.6. PCX, load image, taking PCX file as an int, and PCX struct pointing to it. Finding two constants. Zero is meant to be uncompressed. 0 byte mode is uncompressed. 1 run mode means we want to compress it, and if you swap them, I think it would be the opposite. Set the mode. You read the characters in the file. Set up a few counters. You save some space for the image. Then you point to the start of the image with image pointer. Oh boy, this is getting a little intense. While for I smaller than image size, if we're byte mode means individual versus okay. Mm. Oh no okay no, that's not what it means, right? Byte mode equals 0 is a constant. Byte mode means the next thing is a byte. Run mode means the next thing is a run. We're buffering length to be 5 times 1024. Not entirely sure why. So we start off thinking that a byte is going to come next. Characters. We prepare a byte for the buffer. Either we need it to mean the length or we need to move on. And then buff length is just a discrete buffer. So then you saving some space for the image, that's fine. Point to the start of the buffer that you've set. Well, so you're defining buff pointer to be 0. You're going to use it, I assume, inside buffer. And you're also keeping track of how many characters you read from the file. Then pointer image PTR sends it to the beginning of the image. Alright, and now we're back at the 4. This is okay. If we're looking at a byte mode, and we're past the end of buffer, point to start. So we start off, we are in mode 0. Buffer pointer is bigger or equal than read length. And then we set it to 0 again. Then if the read length is, if you read PCX file buffer buff length is equal to 0, break. Let's start just reading the comments. If for individual byte mode, if past the end of buffer, point to start. Read more bytes from file into buffer. If no more bytes left, break out Oh, okay. So we're reading a bunch of extra bytes to feed to the buffer. And if we're trying to do that and we get 0, it means there's nothing else, so we break. Okay. Um, Next up, we set the out byte to be just buffer at the next byte. If it's bigger than 0x, then BF in hex, which, let's see, B is 11. 11 times 16 is 176. 176 plus 15 is 191. So this means if out byte is 192 or bigger, we read the out byte as an int. I don't know what this and 0x3f is doing. Must be a subtraction or something. And anytime, the length would be past the buffer that we've done, we would read more from it. And then move on and switch to run mode. Otherwise, we'd switch to byte mode. And then we load the next byte into out byte. So if we are in byte mode, and we're not past the end of buffer, we read the next byte. If it represents a run, we read the number of bytes in a run. And then we move to the next one. Wait, I'm losing track of what's... Okay. These two match together. So these two match together. Right, so if the out byte is not 1 and 1, we don't do anything, and so we're back into byte mode. Minus byte count. Oh, so the previous... Where's byte count? Oh, the counter. 0, we go back into byte mode. If instead we did, then we set byte count to be 0x3f. That's just 30 plus 15. No, it's 48 plus 15, which is 53. Fifty-three is how many bytes we have to go between bit pieces. Oh, okay. So this is just the byte. So again, this is just all it's gonna do is gonna determine how many bytes are in the run. I don't know what the exact syntax is doing. And then if when you subtract one from it, you get something that's positive, it means that you get a run. If it was like 193, because there's the possibility that you have a caller that is in the higher end of the spectrum, right? Um, oh, that's what they're looking at there. No, no, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Yeah, because there's a chance that once you get your byte count is just one. So when you subtract one from it, you get zero. In which case, you don't want to do the run. You just want to think of it as a byte. Okay, I sort of understand what this is doing. This is just loading image, and all this does it's load the PCX bitmap into the image array and the PCX color descriptor into the palette array. Well, the second part is going to do the second other thing. So the PCX, the palette is always at the very end. So we go, I see what this does. This is saying, hey, go end the file 768 bytes before, and then read all of them, put them into PCX palette, and it just this is a palette, right? So it's um 3 byte value, the default palette. It's 256 options each for 3. And you're saying, okay, look at all integers up to 256. Look for all j's up to 3. You want the palette I times 3 plus j to be equal to yeah, I don't understand what this bigger than 2 is supposed to do. Must be just an indexing thing. The load image function performs the actual decompressing of the bitmap. It operates in 2 modes defined by the integer constants byte mode and run mode. When the variable mode is set to byte mode, a new byte is read from the disk file. If this byte is in the range 0 to 191, it is written directly to the PCX image buffer, that is, the image field of the PCX struct variable pointed to by the pointer parameter PCX. If it's in PCX mode, the previous file byte, which is stored in the variable out byte, is placed in the buffer, but no new byte is read. When a transmission occurs from byte mode to run mode, I think this is a typo. Is this run? Is this supposed to be run mode? I don't think there's a PCX mode, right? So it's gotta be run mode. That is, if a byte read in byte mode is in the range 192 to 255, the variable byte count is set to the value of the byte read from the file minus 192. This value is then decremented on each subsequent execution of the loop until the run is completed and byte count is restored. I think this is doing sort of like a bitwise operation where it's adding 53 to outbyte. And that's supposed to be the byte count. But it is still unclear to me somewhat what it is. Where does the for loop end? I think it should end. No, this is the if that ends here, I think, right? Because we have this matches to this, which means this matches to this. This matches to this. So yeah, it's the byte mode there that's been done. So this is where the for ends. So you switch the mode, and then you copy it into image pointer plus plus. And then you have not changed if you're still into run mode. You ignore this part. You look at the next byte. Something doesn't quite work for me, but that's fine. The data is read from the disk using the library function read. This function reads a large amount of data from the disk into a RAM buffer. This buffer is then monitored by the code processing the data. In this case, the buffer is imaginatively named buffer. It is 5K in length. The variable buff pointer monitors the current position of the next character in the buffer to be processed. When the value of buff pointer reaches the end of the buffer, another read is executed. The function knows when it has reached the end of the file because the read function returns 0. The load palette functions perform a much simpler task of reading the 256 color descriptors into an array of type car. It is done with a single read into the palette field of PCX. The numbers in the buffer must then be shifted left 2 bits to make them consistent with the format required by the palette setting function of the BIOS. Okay, that's why this is a shift. Okay, I see. Okay. So if we have a byte count that is bigger, that is like 5. Right, we're here. We copy the thing, we go back to the for loop. It's gonna skip this. Wait, no. Oh, it's gonna skip all of this. Subtract 1 from the byte count. Okay, so this is the thing. This subtracts and saves the information in byte count. It's gonna subtract 1 from byte count, and then copy the current out byte into the next thing in the image, and then repeat. We're still in run mode, so we're gonna ignore everything. We're gonna go here, we subtract 1. Is it 0 yet? No, we're gone. Until we reach the end, we subtract 1 from it, it is 0. So we switch to byte mode, we copy it, and then the next time we run it, we're now in byte mode. We're gonna check our buffer, we're gonna switch the output with the next thing of the buffer, look at its length. If it's bigger than 192, figure out its byte count, and then do the run. If not, um, yeah, these two are mushed together. If not, we're just gonna copy it. We're still in batch mode, and we go back up. Okay. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Intense, but it does make some sense. Come on, son. It's time to go to bed.
Timmy's dad came out of nowhere and gently took the book from his son's hands.
Dad, you're home. When'd you get here? Oh no, I forgot to come say hi to you. I've been here for half an hour and already had dinner. I tried to call out for you, but you were so absorbed it didn't even register.
Timmy looked at the clock. 9:30 p.m. already? Where had time gone?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Dad.
Timmy was legitimately upset at having ignored his dad and was mystified at how much this book was absorbing his interest.
It's okay, son. I'm glad to see you're really interested in programming. There's a good career path for you if this interest keeps up. Though it might take a few years for you to get to study it the way it's meant to be. Now go get ready and say goodnight to your mom.
Now that his hyperfixation had been taken away, the weight of the evening's mental effort finally hit Timmy all at once. His eyelids felt heavy, and he was very happy to be gently corralled to bed. He could barely hear Tommy say,
Man, I hope the game is worth the 8 a.m. alarm.
as he snuggled up in bed and slowly lost track of everything that surrounded him. And seconds became minutes, and minutes became hours, and Wednesday night gave way to Thursday morning.